got quiet. I got quiet real fast. Jeez. Well, good evening, everybody. Thanks for coming out to the last BioArbor for the season before we take a nice summer break. If any of you were following the emails and were otherwise online about tonight's event, you'll see that we've shaken up the lineup here a little bit. Mark Arizmendi, who was supposed to be one of the panelists, decided that we were less important than him closing on $1 million deal with one of his virtual companies. So he is not here tonight. So we did a little rearranging. But tonight's topic is virtual reality, building real life science value with virtual teams. I'm Stephen Rapundolo, president of MishBio. I'm pinch hitting as the moderator. But real quick, a few announcements. If you haven't already done so, we certainly invite you to visit the new MishBio website. There's a bunch of nice resources and information on the Bio Toolbox tab of our site for startups and stuff. Let us know what you think of the site and the various features. There's a product showcase for those of you who do products and services. There's other features that are going to be rolling out, so we want to know what you think and what we can do better. We are hosting a biomixer in Grand Rapids on the 16th. If you have not been up there anytime recently to interface with GR Current, which is the now version of the former West Michigan Science and Technology Initiative, their smart zone, I would encourage you to come to the mixer. They've got some new digs, some of which are focused on medical devices and stuff. So it's a great opportunity to come meet some people that you probably don't otherwise come across and see some of the facilities and venues that they have. And then lastly, for those member companies of ours, and I know there's a number of you in the audience, by all means, we want to hear about what's going on in your shops. So any news, any events, please, you can easily go on our new website and download or upload those and let everybody else know what's going on with you and where and when. All right, so tonight's topic, virtual reality, building real life science value with virtual teams. When we sat down, actually I have to do a formal, I'm getting right, whoa. Okay, so tonight's panelists are going to be John Freshley, who's CEO of ONL Therapeutics right now. He'll talk about his bio, but he's obviously been a serial entrepreneur here in the area for a long time. We've got Charlie Biscayre, old buddy of mine when we were from Park Davis days and Pfizer days, who went on to form Asperion and is also a serial entrepreneur. And then to my immediate left is Kevin McLeod, who's CEO of Socorro Medical, but also is executive director of the Michigan Medical Device Accelerator based in Kalamazoo. This event and series couldn't be possible without the sponsors, so thank you to Ann Arbor Spark. Thank you to, especially to Brinks. They are the law firm. They are the most generous supporters. They pay for your drink and your food, and we greatly appreciate that. This is the group, the steering committee, that oversees and tries to coordinate this programming. There's a lot of good people on this list. If you have any thoughts about future topics and otherwise have comments about our programming, please do get in touch with us. We'd be happy to talk to you about your ideas. All right, so tonight's topic. When we got started, when we were talking about holding this event and this topic, I think we realized that obviously virtual companies, that was sort of a little bit of the name of the game. It was an evolving paradigm here in Michigan. But it seems to be the topic of the day because if any of you have been following the media rather closely in the last couple of days, this topic is really right there in the spotlight. I mean, just yesterday today was the Wall Street Journal, virtual biotechs, no lab space, few employees, and right in the front picture is no less Joshua Boger, who was the former CEO of Vertex. And I think once upon a time, if you said virtual company, most people would probably think, well, you're out somewhere in the hinterlands, you don't have the wherewithal to easily access this or that. But here we are, even the major hubs right there in Cambridge, Mass. The virtual company model is very much going on. And then those of you who follow LifeSci VC, that's Bruce Booth at Atlas Ventures, has a nice blog. I would highly recommend it. But again, is either yesterday or today, Biotech's virtual reality. This is really the way the whole ecosystem has sort of evolved, not the least of which because of much of the consolidation that's gone on in the pharma world, but also it's going on in the device world as well. And so here we are talking about that tonight. So just to kind of kick things off, I wanted to first allow each of the panelists to kind of give themselves a little brief bio and introduction to themselves as to who they are, what they do, and in particular, why they're interested in this topic of virtual companies. So why don't we start with Charlie there?
Hi, I'm Charlie Bisgay. I came to Ann Arbor, I guess, in 1990 to join Park Davis, which was not a virtual company. and probably many of you here have some experience in the big pharma. I moved on in '98 to Esperion Therapeutics. We formed that company, but that was not virtual. It was a real company. We had office space, people interacting every day. And from there, I think people know we sold that to Pfizer, and I moved on to work at Pipex after that, and was there for a few years, and then I decided to retire. And that only lasted for a few months, and I came back in, and I thought it would be useful to get involved in investing in some startups, and that's when I was really introduced to, the concept of virtual companies. And one of the companies we invested in was Hygieia, and it's actually the CEO is on the wall there next to David Bloom. Quite a successful company in town developing a device, and they started off kind of virtually, and they have moved more to now, real structure. Invested in also another company which is now virtual. It's a license that we took out of Pfizer for a compound that's in development right now, about to enter phase 3. And then I'm involved in some other type of startups. Some are in the biospace, some are not in the biospace. Another virtual company that we're working on is a company that's developing technology for a cancer diagnostic. I guess I left out, I also ran ProNite Therapeutics for a couple of years. They were somewhat of a virtual company. They started out as a real company, then they went virtual when they ran out of money. And they had meetings all the time, but no money to do anything. And we decided to raise some money, get the clinical study underway, and it turned out to be a success story. They actually have a drug and a platform that's quite useful, and that's now in phase 2, and we just closed on a very large round. So that's my history. So,
John?
That's great. So we have two different definitions of virtual. We have virtual by choice and virtual by necessity. And I have some experience with both. So my name's John Freshley. I've been involved in startup companies in the biotech space for the last 15 years, and several of those have been virtual. And in both drug development companies, currently O&L Therapeutics is a virtual drug development company. Our CMO is based in Rochester and is a full-time or a half-time retinal surgeon and a half-time consultant, and we get his evening hours. We've got our president and CSO is a full-time professor and retinal surgeon at the University of Michigan, and we get his 20% he's allowed, but we call it 80. And I spend 50% of my time working on the company. I'm soon to be the company's first actual employee. We're getting there. And we also have one of our founders runs a CRO, an ophthalmology CRO in Kalamazoo, where we do all of our preclinical work. So that's an example of how we operate virtually, and it actually works really well for us. And previously, I was one of the folks that helped launch Compendia Bioscience. Compendia Bioscience was really a contract research organization. We were an expert consultancy that focused on cancer genomics. But we partnered primarily with big pharma. We worked with about 17 of the top 20 big pharma, and they were far from virtual. But they were trying to do virtual things. So we can talk a little bit later about pharma trying to externalize their research and trying to operate and get some of the benefits of some of these virtual attributes. But we also partnered heavily with small 5 to 20 people biotech companies that didn't have any cancer genomics capability. It required too much infrastructure for them to do themselves. So I think one of the things I think is interesting about this topic in this community is most of the people in this community either are in virtual companies, small development companies, or they're serving virtual companies as service providers, contractors, expert services, consultants, etc. So that's how I got here.
Great, and we'll get back to that in a second. Kevin?
I'm Kevin McLeod. I'm the managing director of the Michigan Medical Device Accelerator based out of Kalamazoo. And this is my 22nd year in med device space, 17 of which were with Stryker Corporation based out of Kalamazoo, Geneva, and other places in between. The Medical Device Accelerator we started 4 years ago with $15 million, we thought, to invest in medical devices. 15 turned into zero in about 6 months when the previous governor disappeared in her last 6 months of governorship. So we are virtual out of necessity, but I think what we've learned is that we believe in deploying the right resources at the right time. And we have 5 companies that we're actively involved with equity stakes, each at very different stages in development. And we deploy the right resources through our network and our ecosystem at the right time. ENT Biotech company has started out of Grosse Pointe. Andrea Dixon is the CEO here in the room, and Bart with a concept. But they are the prototype of who I have always worked with, a physician specifically with an idea. And we believe that physicians should keep their day job for the most part until it's necessary that they could leave if they choose to. In the medical device space, 95% of the 50 products I've launched in the last 22 years, there's probably about 80% of those were that exact model that we just took them over at Stryker for the most part. So ENT Biotech one, PRS Medical is based out of Palo Alto. I'm on the board of that company. We have equity in there. Who else am I involved with? Socorro Medical, which is we're currently in the raising money for. It's a doctor, a hand surgeon out of San Francisco, who has a carpal tunnel device that has a 510K approval, but no commercialization strategy and no funding at the moment. So we're actively involved in that on a daily basis. Impact Athletic is a company that I founded that is up and running now that sells athletic training tables. A bit of a departure from the traditional medical device, but it's a manufacturing company that is completely virtual, based out of Kalamazoo, but also all parts sourced in West Michigan. And then Nanomag, which is an unbelievable technology, pulled from Plymouth here, not too far away. Early stage, a lot of promise, but a lot of work in front of it. So that's essentially how we work in this virtual model and pulling things in the right resources at the right time and trying to keep our head above water.
Great. Just out of curiosity, those in the audience, how many raise of hands, how many are actually involved in virtual companies? All right. How many of you are somehow interfacing with a virtual company, either as a CRO, as a provider, what have you? Don't be shy. All right. Great. Okay. Question to each of you. And some of you already sort of hinted a little bit at this, but how do you define a virtual company? What are the elements that make up, in your definition of a virtual company? John, let's start with you.
Okay, I'll name one, not to take them all. Lean. I think virtual companies are lean. Few employees, few management, trying to get work done. Just
Quickly interject here before we move on to the other two, but it used to be that the paradigm was mostly, at least in the pharma world, that these were clinical stage companies, and perhaps that has changed, and you can comment on that. But Kevin, definition?
Well, and I think it's probably stealing a little bit. Cash efficient is the best way I would describe them in that It's lean by necessity because of the efficiency and the cash situation. And let's face it, and I think Andrea mentioned that this is probably the gist of the Wall Street Journal article this morning, but at the end of the day, nobody chooses necessarily to be virtual because of the cash, where we're at in the VC and the equity models today. Cash is not just going to come because you're good looking with a good idea. And 10 years ago, I'd argue that it was fairly simple compared to where we are today. So the cash efficiency is bringing the right people in at the right time.
Are we allowed to argue?
No.
Let's give Charlie a chance first, and then you can argue both of them.
Virtual companies on somewhat have been created because of the world we live in. You know, everybody uses a computer. I mean, look, 20 years ago, you know, everybody had to work on paper, and you have the convenience of working anywhere in the world and communicating with folks. So, of course, there's, you know, cost savings in that. And then in terms of what was just said earlier, what is the work of the company? Is it doing discovery, or is it doing clinical development? And you know, for things where you don't need to have in-house expertise or facility, you might as well be virtual and not have to, you know, work with running a facility, which in itself is quite expensive. So again, so I kind of define virtual as a shop which may or may have a office someplace, not a huge office, and where the participants really communicate with each other by phone, computer, and there's challenges with that, of course. You don't see everybody. It's kind of like herding cats to run a virtual company, and I think many have done it because of the time and also the cost of running a company.
Well, Charlie, you mentioned about the world we live in. How much, and this is a question to all of you, how much do you think is these virtual companies have come to be because of the changing landscape in terms of certainly the big pharma and the consolidation that's occurred and how they are now doing business that has forced perhaps, you know, this new crop of virtual companies that are developing technologies that they otherwise would have been, you know, that would have been internalized in their own R&D shops and no longer exist now.
Right. So you can talk about, you know, these things being virtual by necessity and by the world we live in, but I think you can also think about it as opportunity. And you know, if I was trying to develop a product today, which I am, I don't want to build a big team of people to manage. I want to get a product as quickly as possible to patients, to the market, and I want to do that with the most expert people I can find. And what a virtual model allows me to do, and what the strategic, I've got a little problem here. I've got two things in each hand, and I'm Portuguese. I'm going to throw something at some point. But what the virtual model and the downsizing of pharma allows you to do is go anywhere in the world and find the best experts to do a particular job to move you from point A to point B to accomplish a milestone. And I think that that's tremendous opportunity, and it also democratizes the world. I can do that just as well from Ann Arbor, Michigan as the people in Cambridge, Massachusetts. I can find that expertise, and I can execute a plan. Now, finding the money is a little more challenging here than it is in Cambridge, and I'm also someone who likes FaceTime, and that's more challenging. But to me, the rearranging that maybe has been forced upon us is actually a great thing if you want to get products to market. If you want to build big companies, maybe not so. But if you want to get products launched, I think it actually is not a bad force.
Well, and that's I agree wholeheartedly I think I know what you were going to argue with me about, and you'd be preaching to the choir, honestly, because
right.
I think and I believe that, in the way I frame a lot, is these are projects for me. Right. And the reality is, in my former life, we had 5, 6, 7 of these going on at once, all being done virtually. Plants in Puerto Rico, engineering group in Germany, and a corporate office in Geneva, Switzerland. So the virtual model exists in a number of different models. Technology makes it so much easier for us to continue to do it. We can do it from Starbucks half the time. But the reality is, it's all about efficient processes and finding the experts in the field. Medical devices, we're pretty fortunate that I can drive to a lot of the places because it's design and development oriented with, some people with a quality policy to be able to manufacture it. But I think what we're fortunate of is having enough of an ecosystem in Michigan to do it. And then, of course, we're going to have to go out and get very creative when cash comes up because it's not aplenty, but it is there, and it's there early stage if you're cash efficient. And I'll pick on Andrea because she's in the room, but, I mean, if you look at how she's pieced this thing together, and, she's got a Jack Ball on her board. She's got an amazing group of people built around her because she had to. And she knew she was smart enough to know that if she can get all the experts in the field to build this thing, they may not all live in Grosse Pointe. And matter of fact, some days I think she's glad we don't live by her. But I think that's the model that needs to go forward. And to your question, I don't think it's a necessity. So med device manufacturers are just really getting to the point where pharmaceutical has been for years, in that they just can't be quick and nimble and innovative anymore. I think that just makes a better opportunity for those who choose to be on this side. I don't think what we're doing is a necessity of their existence, but it's a better opportunity for us to have things that can be sold.
Charlie, comments?
So, the big pharma, again, also have transformed because of the time. There's that many, billion-dollar drugs out there, today. A lot of them are off patent. They can't support, research and development staff. And so I kind of view the big pharmas almost as banks and late-stage developers. They take they cherry-pick the products which are promising, which they don't have to pay a lot of the upfront expenses for, and then bring them through development. So, that world has changed also, and many of us, I guess, in the room and around the world have been let go from these big companies, or left these big companies, and we're looking to, stay in our trained profession. And so they are still part of the game, the big farmers. They have the resources to bring something to market, and a strategic partner to help a small virtual company, as long as you have something promising. Well, I guess we'll get to, what we think is the necessities of a virtual company to make it attractive and make it successful in future questions here.
Yeah. Well, I notice, I just take note of this Life Science VC blog today, in that the example they use is of a company called Nimbus Discovery. So these folks have 6 ongoing programs across 3 therapeutic areas, managed by 12 internal FTEs that then in turn manage 80 or 90 external FTEs across 3 continents. I mean, that almost describes one of these big companies. I mean, that's what we used to do when we were in the big world. So the model has really transformed itself. Any comments to add to this particular point that we were just talking about? Comments, questions? We're going to make this a little bit more interactive than we normally do. Don't be shy. Julia.
So I'm interested in the distinction between virtual by necessity and virtual by choice, as John termed it, because I think almost all startups start virtual by necessity, because before you have any money, you're putting together your team, you're virtual by necessity. But virtual by choice is a very different story, and I think is what Bruce Booth and Jonathan Montague were touching on in the blog post today, and I think is the growing and much more meaningful trend. So I'd be interested in the thoughts from the panel on the choosing to grow a company as a virtual organization.
So I'm just going to very briefly repeat that for the benefit of those who are, because this is being taped and live streamed, so they may or may not have picked that up. So basically, Julie's asking about the distinction between virtual by necessity and virtual by choice. And
So it sounds like, what are some of the advantages of being
that was going to be
virtual?
one of my next questions. What do each of you think are the advantages of a virtual company?
So
Anyway.
I'll tell you why I would choose to be virtual, at least from the start and really through product commercialization, is that I want to sell these things as fast as I can, and the less I have in and the more equity I keep, I'll have a better opportunity to do that. So that would be the big, hairy, audacious goal of why we try to stay as virtual as we can. But at the end of the day, I also want to be able to pick up the pieces I need at the right time. So being virtual allows me, I don't have to worry about managing the wrong hires. I don't have to worry about, healthcare. I don't have to worry about the small HR things that come up with whether you have 1 or 100 employees. I want to move the product or concept along as fast as possible and exit at the best opportunity.
Good answer.
That's it. Just small goals.
John?
He just named a
Anything?
bunch of them. I mean, for me, it's all about focus, being able to be focused. And as I said, yeah, you're right. Whether you're managing 1 person or 100 people, each person exponentially, actually, in many ways, adds a burden to the management. And I think if you're, talking about, and then it's the access to talent. We have amazing talent in Michigan. And I'll go anywhere in the world and tell people that. And the fact that Park Davis was here and we still have a vertically integrated pharmaceutical company here in town in parts is a tremendous asset, and I sell it all over the world. But there are times when you're in a specific therapeutic area or you're in a specific disease and you need to go anywhere in the world to find the right expert to bring that program forward. And virtual is the only way to do that. So I think access to expertise is a reason to be virtual, and to be able to be focused on a project, on a product launch, on a product development is another very good reason.
Charlie, anything to add?
I think virtual because of necessity. I think that's easy. You have no money, so you have to be virtual. But by choice, the advantages. I think I'm going to ask a question to the audience. How many of you work in more than one company? So few hands up. But do you think if you were in a full-fledged company, you'd be able to do that easily, considering the traveling time back and forth? And so again, like I said earlier, the world has changed, and I think we use our time more efficiently with the machines we have, and we can interact with the company for a specific goal, for a specific amount of time. We don't have to sit around an office all day. That is not very efficient. We use our time more efficiently, and I think having a virtual company allows us to do that, to multitask between different jobs, even within the company and between companies. At least, in my experience, I'm involved in a number of these virtual companies, and, I spend a little bit of time with each one of them, and so I'm not fully committed to any one company, and it allows me to do that. In terms of the efficiency, I think there is clearly cost savings, being virtual. But you have to, I always say, what you, might, gain in efficiency, you might lose in time in terms of, it takes time to herd people together and to get things done and to keep people on task. You generally, I think, if you're going to run a virtual company, you need a good project manager, somebody to keep everybody in line.
All right. Yeah, Steve.
So I have a question about that dynamic between flexibility of procuring expertise and minimizing resource outlays for just putting resources at the right time, and balancing that sort of structure with the funding side. So do you ever, do you encounter funding is hard for any starting up, but do you encounter barriers to funding based on that virtual model? In other words, people are reluctant to give you money because they don't, whatever you don't conform to their view of what the structure, a corporate structure around what your goal is adequate or sufficient. So, they need to have a full-time CEO, you need to have a full-time CFO,
Right.
you run into constraints like that.
Yeah. So the question is the balance between running a virtual company and the challenges that may bring in terms of expectations from the outside in terms of funding and so forth that would impinge on that. Yeah.
I can talk about that a little bit because I've experienced both sides of that. On the one hand, a lot of investors like the virtual model a lot because it's capital efficient. It's an easier return on their investment. But I've also seen, it's interesting, one comment from an SBIR reviewer said, I have some concerns about this company because it seems like it might be virtual. and that was a critique, right? And I think, and we've heard from a couple of the angel investors who we've talked to, is that the fact that we have employees that have more than one thing. Are we hedging our bets? Are we all in on this opportunity, or are we hedging bets on our opportunity, right? So I think that creates a reasonable concern for investors. I mean, I think that, I think you can play that both ways. So I think that's the only issue I've heard. I think the most investors today realize that the benefits can outweigh the negatives. I think we'll talk about some of the negatives. I think there are really significant challenges in executing a virtual company. But
Charlie or Kevin, to that question?
In terms of funding.
The balance between, running a virtual company and what that may present to potential funders who expect more of a,
dedicated team.
a dedicated team.
Again, I think people invest for a variety of reasons. If it's not your rich uncle, but
Just bring that mic up a little closer.
I said, people invest for various reasons, unless it's your rich uncle that likes you or something like that. But investors, really want to see a return on their investment, and I think what they're looking at generally are the people who are running the company, whether it's virtual, non-virtual, their record of success, how they manage things, and really, I think, do they have a product candidate that they think will be successful, and is it protected? And so I think it's a very simple solution for investors. You have to present to the investors, and you have to believe in it, that you do have something that you can develop quickly, efficiently, it has value, big, large market, and somebody has the opportunity to get in early and to continue on through the cycles of rounds to support your company for an eventual exit, whatever that might be. So I think a lot of this, I know it's very difficult to get money for investments for many companies, but you have to keep at it, and you basically have to demonstrate that you can be successful, and that there's value in your product, and that's what and I've been in companies where the products are spectacular, I believe, and it's still very hard to get investments. It's just a sign of the time, 2008, when everything blew up, with the Lehman collapse and money getting very tight. It's been a slow recovery, and investors got burnt, and they're very reluctant to just put good money after bad. So, but I think, again, times are changing, and as we have more successes in these smaller virtual companies, you'll see more and more interest of investors.
Kevin, anything to add?
Yeah, so I spoke for 2 hours this morning with an investor about this exact topic. I think, and they should have reservations. And I think every company, whether you call yourself virtual or not, has to have somebody full-time from day one. There has to be somebody who is carrying the flag. So let's not get carried away. At least in my concept of virtual, that's what I believe. And most investors would agree with that. But I think then the question comes, how do you deploy the right resources at the right time? And I think we can have an educated conversation with most investors around that, which is exactly what we talked about this morning. But to think that these companies can exist without somebody 100% is foolish, at least from day one. So again, one man's opinion, but I think a lot of us would share that. And I think Jack and I had a long conversation about this exact thing at one point. but
I'm a fool.
Yeah, but I think, and like I said, it's all about, and as this thing moves along the commercialization process, you have to pick up more full-time people, because then it gets real. So, but the interesting thing on the flip side, I've seen, so the Device Accelerator, we go out and source these ideas, and I've had founders and entrepreneurs and inventors who said, I don't like that model. I want a full team, and I don't want to work with you. And that's where you have to realize where people's mindset are and how they feel it. And so whether it's an inventor or an investor, that mindset still exists. Andrea. She's the CEO of one of my companies. I have to call on her.
Okay. How
Just want to say that in front of my wife. And one thing, I mean, we talked about the culture, right? We just had this conversation. We have a culture at ENT Biotech. We don't even, the core team doesn't live within 30 miles of each other. But we have a culture, and we know who fits and who doesn't. And you know, we know someone's on the team right now who doesn't fit the culture. And we don't even, you know, we see him once, did I say him? See this person once, you know, once in a while. But I think that's...
This is being recorded.
Yeah, exactly. He's listening.
Good segue into the challenges here.
So that wasn't ENT Biotech I was talking about. But I think the reality is you can't get, so I'll pick on Ryan, he's in the room as well. Ryan Jankovic's got 15 years of medical device experience that mirrors what I've done. I can't afford him at any of the companies I work at today, but I can afford him with 2 of them. So I get an amazing pool of knowledge that I would never be able to afford typically if I were to hire him one-on-one. And he's not coming to work for the prices I could pay him. So there's, you know, we can get into this.
Well, so I've just to kind of sum up in this sort of space about the positives. So I heard capital efficiency. I heard access to talent. I heard focus on core competency. Any other focus? Let's flip it then. How about the challenges? Talk a little bit about the difficulties or the challenges in communication when running a virtual company. Charlie?
Like I said, herding cats. Today we had a conference call, and somebody couldn't make it this morning at 10 o'clock, and we have collaborators in Europe, and they didn't really want to talk in the middle of their night. So, you know, it's so you have to, you know, bring all these people together at the same time, and then there's always seems to be scheduling problems and bringing people together and making there's a lot of coordination to get the team together, and so there has to be, like I said earlier, the project manager who really enforces the law and makes sure things move forward. You know, reminds you that this thing is due in 3 days from now. You're going to have it ready for me, and so you have to. It's a very different set of standards than when you're all in the same office, seeing each other every day and being reminded of the task. You're not being reminded of the task all the time when you're virtual, and I agree there has to be a constant force in the company, the leader of the company, and I think without that person, the place falls apart. So you know, it is very challenging. You know, getting everybody to agree and to, you know, work on the same thing at the same time, even though you think it should take, it should be more efficient because you get less people, less opinions to get jobs done.
John, anything to add to that? What's your experience?
No, I mean, it's a very difficult model for me personally, because I'm a FaceTime person. I like to have an idea, walk in an office, sit down, and talk to somebody, and I can't do that. And so I find that really challenging. And the invention of instant message is great because I have an idea, I want to share it a lot of the time. I'm getting better at that. I'm working on it. It's but instant messenger is something that I use an awful lot. But I also think, you know, we've talked a little bit about project management, and unfortunately that term really doesn't represent the importance of the role. You know, I really think of a project manager in a virtual company as the chief operating officer. That's the glue that holds everyone together, and I actually think it's, you know, in many cases that's the appropriate title. And you do need someone who can continually and constantly think actually 3 steps ahead to herd the cats, because if you start herding the cats when they're running, it's really too late. So when you're trying to manage these teams, there's an awful lot of pre-work and planning that someone needs to do on a continuous and constant basis to keep people aligned, to make sure that everyone understands what the objectives are. You know, any startup company, you know, and one of the challenges I first had in doing this virtually, when we first started Compendia, we opened up an office in Gaithersburg, Maryland, about 6 months after we opened the company, because our competitor had just let a bunch of people go. We were like, oh, that's too good to be true. We gotta hire these people. And so we tried to manage that. And we were making decisions on an hourly basis. And these people had no clue what we were doing. But that's what startup companies do. You make decisions in real time. And so to try to do that in a virtual world, in a virtual company, really requires someone to be continuously monitoring that process and half a step ahead of it, even when it's happening on an hourly basis. And I think that's, you know, the greatest communication challenge, because you got people who find out a decision was made yesterday that actually impacts what they just spent the whole day doing, and they wouldn't have done it. And that's not using the right resource at the right time. It's wasting resources.
Kevin, how about you? I mean, you've got Socorro founders are in California. You got Mark Arizmendi, who would have been here tonight, who's mostly North Carolina, although he now has an office here in Ann Arbor. How difficult is communication in terms of
Yeah, I mean,
moving these companies forward?
It's extremely difficult, and that's you know, the biggest issue with this virtual concept. I mean, my design review meeting is at 10 p.m. Thursday evenings with Taiwan, Minneapolis, Anaheim, San Francisco, and Kalamazoo represented. So, but we've got it. The prototypes ship. They go all in one place. We put it together there. It ships to San Francisco. I get it after the doc gets it. But I think at the end of the day, it works, and we got an amazing product right now. So it's just, you know, so what suffers is me in my family. However, I can tell you, I did 3 a.m. conference calls at Stryker when I was head of global marketing, when my office was in Geneva and I was living in Kalamazoo. We manufactured in Kiel, and we shipped to Singapore. So I think that we're kidding ourselves if we don't think this has happened in every organization over time that's gone global. The issue for us is that, you know, we haven't even gone global yet, but we still have to do it. So it's just earlier in the process. So, you know, there's advantages and disadvantages, and I think some of the disadvantages is really the advantage to these virtual companies. That made absolutely no sense, I know.
Well,
Sounded very philosophical.
That's the kind of guy you are, Kevin. Jonathan, you mentioned FaceTime. So let's sort of flip that a little bit. When is it important to have FaceTime and not try to do something over the wires? Are there certain instances, certain situations where you really need that versus others?
You realize I offered to moderate because I had all the questions and not the answers.
Questions are good. They're provocative. Stirs discussion. Maybe there are those in the audience who want to comment.
I do think that you know, one of the things that when we started Compendia that was important to us, and that we tried to execute and didn't always successfully, is we tried to figure out when a decision was coming. We tried to decide how we were going to make the decision before we made the decision, which sounds obvious. But a lot of the time, you just go into a room, you say, we're going to decide something, and you start looking at the data, and then you start trying to figure out what decision to make, but there's no decision process. And so when it comes to FaceTime, I think there are certain decisions that you really should be in the room together to make. And
such as?
Decisions that you're going to live with
So
for the next 18 months. I would say, decisions on your signing off, figuring out your clinical plan, figuring out your market launch plan, that you want to make sure that everyone on the team has the opportunity to speak their mind, to be heard, and I think importantly, you have to create the decision process that enables that. And you have to have that process clearly outlined before you get in that room. So, again, if you're going to have FaceTime, the FaceTime actually becomes the final event of a long process that you've prepared for. And as a virtual company, the preparation is 3 times what it might be in a non-virtual company. So that when you do have that small, precious amount of time, you can maximize it.
Kevin or Charlie, when's important to have FaceTime factor in?
I always think about the human element and body language and being able to read folks. You can't do that easily over the phone. I mean, most of you here in this room right now, because I don't think it was for the free food. Oh, except for David, maybe over there. But you know, you want to see, you know, how we react and how we speak about this topic, and you know, what we're saying is, you know, realistic or BS, and you can read that in us. You know, I think you can tell what we're saying and how we act. And as I can read the audience, some of you, you know, are very, you know, attentive looking, and some are asleep, David. and I don't really want to pick on David, but he's a good, you know, old friend of mine.
It's
But,
easy. It's easy.
you know, I think you really need that interaction at some point in your company. Every time, you know, even though some of my companies are virtual, we do make it a regular, you know, a basis, a meeting face to face, either a board meeting or an important decision that we can all sit in the room and discuss it, as opposed to being on the phone or, you know, on Skype or something like that. And I think it's a key element that is very important when you need FaceTime.
How about distractions? Oh, were you gonna add something,
Well, I was
Kevin?
gonna, you know, I deal with physical products, so it's a little different, and we have to be together. And as a matter of fact, that's the one place I would say that we've been a little lax in making sure we're all touching products. We're all through the design process because we're taking more time than we should. So so there's a FaceTime, and I believe that there should be a minimum of quarterly meetings, not just with board but with team, because you're also building culture in a virtual company, so it's important. But as far as routine decisions, you know, FaceTime for me is on my phone. It's the easiest, and you know, we can get video anywhere and be intimate that way, and so.
How about distractions from other responsibilities, since you're obviously juggling a few other things too while you're doing any given virtual company? How much of a challenge is that? How much does it impact your ability to give everything 100% to one single focus versus splitting it up amongst several? Kevin?
So I would argue that I give 100% to everything. The question is a matter of this concept of time. I mean, nobody here, I'm sure, has ever considered a 40-hour work week routine. There's a lot of people who do. I mean, the reality is I can give 100% to, and I can't do more than what I have today, and maybe I would say maybe I have one too many right now. But we're looking for someone to run that, so that'll go away. But the reality is I can give 100%. It's just not 100% of a traditional work week. And the reality is that's why I'm doing conference calls at 10 o'clock. That's why I'm up at very early in the morning. But there's not one time where I'm not thinking about how ENT biotech could be better, even if it's you know, middle of the night. I'm working for ENT biotech, and so I just stretch what is conventional wisdom when it comes to work.
Andrea, are you getting your money's worth out there? John or Charlie, comment to that? Distraction with other responsibilities, you know, balancing the different sort of virtual commitments you might have?
Distracted here. No, I think, you know, you do have a tendency to, I guess, human nature to not focus on something if you're not there in the room face to face with people, and you know, you're you know, eating breakfast while you're, you know, on the phone call, or, you know, whatever you're doing, and so you're not paying full attention in a conference room where you have a team meeting, and I think it's very efficient because you're there to do that task. So you really have to challenge yourself, I think, in a virtual company to focus on a project and the task at hand. So it does take different challenges. And, you know, the other thing is, you know, when I was at some of these large companies, it was almost like everybody read the book The Firm, you know, where everybody did everything together at work and outside of work. And so like at Park Davis, they had, you know, everybody seemed to be like The Firm, you know, they did There was the bowling team, the tennis team, and then there was the development team. So everything was a team, and they always seemed to, I don't know, maybe it's my reality of this, they were trying to control everybody's life inside and outside the company. And it seemed to be, so when you were, doing some
Charlie was the
extra-
nonconformist in the group at Park Davis.
extracurricular activity, they expected you to still be talking about work, So, I think when you have a company, where people are not, at a central location, it's just, that face time and that distractiveness, it can get in the way of performance.
Yep.
So the question is about getting a little deeper into what you were talking about in terms of establishing that culture that's needed to efficiently run the virtual company.
Sure, I think, and I'm going to toss this to Andrea before in a second, unless you were leaving. But so I think I'm driven by passion. I'm a very clear. There's very few people who wonder what I'm thinking, and I think that has to be known by the team. Everybody has to know each other in the team and the culture, and I think in this virtual world that we're speaking of, people have to be on board with that, even though you're not seeing each other every day. It has to be pervasive, and not that everyone has to be the same. Everyone's going to be their own individual, but we have to know that when we get together, we all know how to act and what the mission is and how we're all pushing it forward. And it's difficult in this virtual concept, but I mean, Andrea, I'm going to ask you to just mention how you think we built it, but the reality is I think you have to find out what that culture is and cultivate it no matter where the team is. Andrea, you want to?
Any comments, Andrea?
It's what motivates them. And if you understand that about each other, and most people in this room have had other life experiences, they've been around the block, so they're a little tough. So they can handle the candor. So I think that those are the things, the professionalism, the understanding that if you trust that everyone else on the team, it's really excellence or, getting it over the finish line that's motivating them, and making sure that everyone understands those ground rules and that it's not personal.
Yeah, which I think is, especially with someone like me on the team, if you're on a conference call with me once a year, you don't like me. And that's, and I've been told that. And I think the reality is you have to understand what the route, where we're all headed and what's, if making sure all the right people are on the bus. And I think that has to be routine conversation as well as routine sort of team goal orientation, just keeping people steered in the right direction. So that's what I was referring to.
No, I mean, I think also when we talk about the use of FaceTime, and I think this is important to do very, very early in the company's life, is you do need to set those ground rules. And the ground rules shouldn't be the same for every company. They really needed to be designed around the individuals you have. And different people will work, you'll bring out the best in different people in different ways. And you need to explore that. And you need to figure out, do the members of this team fit? I mean, one of the things I have learned is if you figure out a member of the team doesn't fit, you need to act on that.
Well, I was just going to follow up because Kevin's comment earlier about perhaps one team member who doesn't quite fit. What's the solution? How do you deal with that?
Stop talking to him. No, I mean, it's the reality is you have to remember we're picking up pieces as we need them, and they are not full-time employees. So that's the beauty of someone who doesn't quite
So it's
fit
plug,
the culture.
play, and unplug?
Yeah, if needed. Or is it there's an issue with the culture? I mean, to say that the company's culture, just because we have one doesn't mean it's right. Mm-hmm. And I also believe that culture evolves as the company grows, which I think everyone probably agrees with that. So, the reality is I'm horrible at the current striker today. I do not fit at that company. 22 years ago when I started, we were all a bunch of cowboys looking to, acting like a lot of people who are entrepreneurs today. So it's just understanding culture and how it evolves, and maybe we have to switch a little bit with the culture. So, you know, you don't just cut the head off all the time.
No, but I do think you have to, you know, the culture that you want to have, and as it evolves, but I think it's good to write it down. I think it's good to write down the things that are important to you as a team and review it because it changes. And as you bring people onto the team, make sure that those values align.
Which is great in our startups, meaning whether it's pharma or med device. Our goals are pretty simple. FDA approval, you know, well, first of all, quality system, FDA approval, and then commercialization. And the goals are pretty straightforward.
Yeah.
Now, there's small goals in between each landmark, but if people can't understand that and get on board, it's pretty simple to understand they don't fit.
No, I think the goals are easy. You know, obviously where it gets fun is when you talk about, I mean, you can talk about excellence. Andrea, you know, mentioned, you know, we're all about excellence, which is great. Of course, everyone's going to say that's what they're for. There's a few different ways to get there. There's a few different ways to be excellent, right? And then you have, can you get a, you know, and one of the things I always seek when I'm building a team is I actually want people to disagree, especially with me. You know, so I always will find a board member who will argue with me. I always try to get, you know, 2 experts in every position so that they'll fight with each other in a, you know, in a respectful way so that you get that difference of opinion. And I think, again, to me, that's something that I try to set in the culture is a little bit of gentle conflict, respectful conflict, so that we can try to drive deeper into questions and solutions, because I think that can actually promote excellence if you get 2 smart people thinking about a problem. But that doesn't work for everyone. Not everyone likes that challenge. Not everyone enjoys that environment. It can be tough. So.
Well, I think the management, sorry. Well, I think the management team culture should be separate from the board culture too.
True.
I mean, we want the board to challenge the management culture, right? I mean, and to be able to, and that's why we shouldn't set up boards with, you know, with the wrong people, because if they can't push us, then you have a problem.
Okay. There was a question in the back I saw.
Yes.
I'd like to list the guys you're working with virtually, because virtual companies I've dealt with, I do a lot of shoot work,
Mm-hmm.
getting people to come back. So also want to know, in your model, is it an IOU model or is it a compensation model? Because that makes a big difference. I work with an IOU model. When you get there, we'll all be compensated. That gets less attention than.
Well, I use alt models, and most of the people that I'm working with, there's probably about 2 degrees of separation. So, and that's why I'm only in medical devices. I don't do pharma and I don't do IT because I would get too far from my sphere of influence. So that makes a huge difference. It's a great question because, go ahead.
Let me follow up on that too. So you carry your teams on to new projects, so you know is that kind of
Oh,
what your
yeah, absolutely. I try, you know, we need to build it more as we grow and the opportunities grow. But, you know, if you take 3 of these companies, for instance, I didn't solicit any of these opportunities. We found each other through various means, and the group of people working on it all have either worked with or for or around each other at some point. And that's not just in Stryker land, that's in med devices, and I think that's important, making sure you can check those references.
But what about the instances where you have to deal with third parties that are, you know, you don't know? These are the CROs for what this and that may be in China, maybe
Well, but they
here
still-
domestically. How much of a challenge is that? And then secondly, how do you deal with that to ensure that they're being effective, they're meeting obviously your objectives, and that, you know, brings in all the other things, the cost efficiency, timeliness, so forth? John, Charlie?
I personally am still trying to figure that out. You know, on the IOU model, I think it's dangerous. There's only a few people that I am willing to hire on an IOU model because I don't know if I'm going to ever be able to pay them. And I got to be able to look them in the face and tell them that, right? But I also, very few people will perform the way I want them to. Some IOUs okay, but you know, a mixture is fine. But I'd like to try to drop money in people's laps on a routine, regular basis, even if it's a small amount. But the managing the external, I mean, I've gone straight to CROs and say, why in the heck would you work with me? when you're going to get one project from me and then I'm going to sell the company? Why do you care about my project? It's the most important project in the world to me. Why does it matter to you when your whole business model is on repeat business? So I'm still trying to figure out how best to work with contractors in a way that they will care about my project as much as I care about it. And I would love to learn from others on how they're solving that problem.
Charlie, comments on that?
It's a very good question. I mean, the risk reward, for any new company is something that any employee or contractor has to consider. Generally there's not money to pay people, and I'll just tell a story. When I started Asperium, we didn't have a lot of money to pay salaries, and we paid not terrible salaries but decent salaries, and we would compensate employees with options, of course. And I remember one of the vet techs was complaining that the salary wasn't high enough, she couldn't pay her bills, and so forth and so on. And then a couple of years later, when we sold the company, she said she wished she had more options, and she didn't realize how valuable that was. And most people don't if a company is successful. But it doesn't always work that way. Most of the time it doesn't work that way. And it does take a certain type of person to take that risk, to work in a company and willing to do that, and it always helps if they have somebody else supporting them, because generally these virtual companies and startups, there's not that much money for salaries. It usually goes to the programs. I mean, myself, I had experiences where I've been in companies where I didn't take any salary and just took options instead, because I wanted to preserve capital for the programs. And you have to believe in that the programs will be successful. Sometimes they're not, sometimes they are, but it's a risk you take. And yeah, it is a very good question, and somebody who's running a company really has to figure that out. Now, other companies I've been at, we spent a lot of time fundraising, trying to get folks in the company to almost what the industry standard is for salary, but they are always being compensated with options, and we try hard to compensate folks who are putting more than the usual time into an ideal idea that they believe is going to be valuable and successful. So people put their all into it, and if it is successful, they should be compensated well.
Well, I'm mindful of the time. I think we've had a great discussion. We probably could go on for a little while longer, but are there any other questions from the audience that want to ask these fine gentlemen? Kemp.
So Stephen started out saying that this may be more traditionally something you see in a clinical stage development activity. We've been talking preclinical, but it does sound like we're more on the development side of the spectrum as opposed to discovery, where maybe you're more control of assets, where you're just generating your IP. Is that a fair read of you need a certain maturity, you need an asset, it's an execution risk as opposed to
Yeah, well, the experts can answer, but my take of it, as I see sort of the broad lay of the land, is no. I think that model has expanded, where right from the very start, and you're, I think, an example of the types of companies, and I don't think it's just relegated to medical device, pharma too, and the articles that came out in the last couple of days. I mean, these are companies that have started with just basic idea, and they're putting virtual pieces one on top of each other, and moving things along the preclinical path and then ultimately the clinical path.
If they can get funding. I mean, even if you're virtual, you still need money, right? And so I think that a lot of the virtual companies we're seeing in the discovery phase is venture investors going to, inventors at universities saying, I like the body of your work. I'm sure you can come up with something great if I give you some money. And they start a virtual company. And I've seen, at least in the pharma space, the virtual discovery companies are more in that vein. There's a body of work here. There may be some IP. It may not be the final IP, but it's the beginning of something. We'll give you some money to do discovery. But I think for the majority of us, you need that key IP that's already gotten, has been discovered, that you're then maybe optimizing prior to development. But I think, you know, if you can get it funded in discovery, that's great, or for discovery.
Kevin?
Yeah, I don't think, remember, I'm medical device. It's a much different world. But I think this, depending on your definition of virtual, you can take it all the way through commercialization. I mean, reality is distributor networks have been used for years, and it's a virtual sales model for small companies. So, you know, we are now taking it earlier on and using that same model once we deployed it into commercialization into the market. So, again, you are hiring full-time people along the way, but the reality is the company may never actually be in the manufacturing, sales, marketing, and executives may never be in the same building.
Charlie, final thoughts?
Preclinical, it's a more difficult challenge, I think, but there are ways of, you know, working virtually in preclinical. An example, we used to outsource our chemicals being made to a CRO, a chemistry CRO, and we would select the chemicals that they would make. They would make them. We would own all the intermediates as well as the chemicals, the final products. We would test them in-house, but we could have as easily tested them, you know, with another CRO. And then when we didn't need them anymore, the chemists, we just fired them, you know, and we didn't have to continue. We didn't pay their health care. We didn't have to continue paying them salary. And it came out, you know, we calculated it was about, you know, about $5,000 for each chemical entity at the time that we were paying for. Plus we got all the intermediates. So it was something that you should consider if you're going to go virtual, if that's from the discovery phase, if you're making chemical entities. And there's a lot of shops out there that will, you know, develop an assay and test it for you in either animals or in or in tissue culture or in, you know, some you know, enzymatic assay. So you can have that all outsourced, and you just, you know, buy a block of time, although that block of time is more expensive, you know, than doing it in-house. But in-house, you have to keep people employed, you know, continuously. So there are ways around it if you, you know, think it through. And I think for preclinical, you can be virtual just as well as in a, you know, development company.
Great. Well, thank you, gentlemen. Appreciate the great insight into it. Thank you.